Everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage. We're back for another edition of Thyroid Answers Podcast. And today we've got a special guest on the podcast. And we're going to talk about something I think is really important. I think it's so important that we talk about it, we discuss it, but it's not necessarily like a strength and in my wheelhouse. So we brought somebody in to kind of help us understand a piece of what we think is part of the load that creates chronic healthcare problems for people. And so we're going to introduce Madeleine Lowry in just a second. But before I do that, Dr. Erica is out, and we've brought back Dr. Kelly Halderman to join as like the co-host today on the podcast. So Dr. Kelly, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me again, Dr. Eric. I love doing these with you, and I'm super excited for the Rigglemans to have their baby girl, but it's been fun sitting in. So I'm really excited about our guest today. We're going to bring a lot of great information and stuff that personally helped me. So really awesome to be on the podcast with you today.
So I did not know about this technique. You brought this to me when we were getting the book together and still putting the book together. This was something you said, hey, this is a really positive thing that I think we have to put in there, because in the book we talk about emotional stress and traumatic stress and how that can really impact physiology. And it's one of those things that, I mean, we see it in a lot of people, but I don't really have the skill set to address it. So this is one of those things where it's almost like, okay, we got to bring another person, or we got to send our client to somebody who's got a better set of tools to help fix maybe this past trauma, this past emotion, or this kind of limbic system, that area in the brain that maybe needs a little support, or a little bit of what we might say is rewiring to kind of change their physiology. So Madeleine is a certified nutrition therapy practitioner, but she is somebody who does this technique we're going to talk about, which is called the Map Method. And Madeleine, can you introduce yourself? Can you tell us a little bit about your past experience, your background, how you got into the field you're in, and how you came across the Map Method?
Thank you so much, Dr. Eric. I am so pleased to be here today to share this information with people. I am a certified nutritional therapy practitioner, and I came to that new career, you can say, after 25 years in the business world. I also have an MBA, but because of my own health issues, I went searching like so many people do, and I found what I thought were the answers. And I thought, oh my gosh, more people need to know this. And so I trained as a nutritional therapy practitioner and began to practice. Along the way, I started to specialize more and more with working with people with allergies and sensitivities. This was part of my experience as well. I was, had a tremendous number of food sensitivities, and it seemed like more and more kept showing up as life went on. This is a common story for people, but also chemical sensitivities and other sensitivities, right? And I started to work with people who I suspected had food sensitivities that were causing their physical symptoms. What we're taught to do as nutritional therapy practitioners is take that out of their diet and then see what their health picture looks like, and then see if we can reintroduce that, a couple of months down the line, one food at a time, every 4 days, blah, 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 right? So it's kind of the elimination method. But so I learned along the way, I learned some new techniques like energy kinesiology, so I could test people really quickly in an office visit against, samples of 200 different food substances, and I could send them home with these fairly long lists of suspected food sensitivities. Well, not all my clients were happy about this. They thought, well, what am I going to eat? And I thought, well, this is only 10 foods. You should see what I've eliminated from my diet. But I felt I always, every time I suspected a new sensitivity, I thought, well, I'm just going to remove this, because if this is what it takes for me to be healthy, I'm absolutely going to do it, right? No problem, no question. I consider myself, fairly disciplined. But being faced with this response from my clients made me think, gosh, maybe there's another approach. And they were asking me, how do I get rid? I don't want to figure out what my sensitivities are. I want to get rid of them. And I thought, get rid of them? I don't know how to do that. And so I went looking. I found a basic method of neural retraining. So the nutritional therapy practitioner finds a way to work with the brain. This is after I had learned a number of allergy elimination techniques that were based on, acupressure and acupuncture and other things. But when I started to use this technique around working with the brain, I realized that it had been the brain all along. It wasn't the thing that was doing it to us. It wasn't the food. It wasn't the pollen. It wasn't the environmental irritant that was causing our reactions. It was our brain's response to the thing. At one time, eating the apple was fine, but then suddenly the brain changed its response to that stimulus. And now we have a sensitivity or an allergy reaction, right? And so I learned that it was possible to retrain the brain back to the tolerance we once enjoyed. And by doing so, we could eliminate sensitivities and allergy responses in people, not just for foods, but for chemicals, mold, and other things that they were reacting to. And so this was a big aha moment for me. And I started to teach these principles to my clients, and realized that there was still a group of them that weren't achieving their goal. So like 60 or 70%, every time I taught this, I would teach it in workshops or I teach it one-on-one. Every time I taught it, it was like 60 or 70% did beautifully. And they made progress in at the pace I expect. Others, no. I would check in with them a month or two down the line and they were stuck. And I thought, what is different about these people? And then I learned about adverse childhood experiences. And I added this question to my intake form. And I started to realize that the people with higher levels of lifetime trauma, not just the childhood, but lifetime trauma, were the people who would get stuck with the basic method. Because the basic method is basically learning a set of mental exercises that you went home and you practice yourself for an hour a day for months. For some people, they would they might make some progress, but then they may hit a point where they became more anxious. And I thought, oh, so there's some underlying trauma that has primed their brain to feel like the world is a very dangerous place. And so this underlying trauma has to be dealt with. You can't just pave a new neural pathway right over the old. You can't. For these people, there are like bumps in the road that are bigger. Right. So I thought I need something better. I need something better than this basic method. I need to find something where I just kept thinking, I wish I could rewire their brain in the session. Right. So I don't have to send them home by themselves to do this practice for umpteen months and get nowhere. Right. I wish I could just do this for them somehow. And this was an insane thought. But as I've learned, the universe works in mysterious ways. And I came across a demonstration online and I thought, what is going on in that demonstration? I said, it looks like that person is giving verbal instructions to rewire the other person's brain. And I thought, that is exactly what I'm looking for. And it was called the Map Method. I'd never heard of this before. There are fewer than 200 Map Method practitioners in the world. Okay. So the odds that I would find this are 1 in a million. I mean, it blows my mind still today to realize, how unexpected, right? This would be for me to find this. Anyway, so I trained in this method. I just knew exactly right away, I need this. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And I trained in the method. And now I have a method that works directly with the subconscious mind. The practitioner works with a client, and the client's brain rewires itself based on instructions provided by the practitioner. And with this method, we can address all kinds of subconscious programming, we could call it, relieve subconscious stressors, right? Stressors that we don't even realize are playing on us, and address so many more things than allergies and sensitivities, right? So, I mean, this kind of opened, I thought I was learning a method to help my clients that were not responding to the initial technique that I had. But then I realized I had something that was just much more widely applicable. And so that is how I got where I am today.
So let me break this down for the listener. So one of the things, and we talk about on the podcast quite a bit, is that it's because this is the Thyroid Answers podcast. So people who have thyroid issues are coming to this. And many times people think that the thyroid itself is the problem. We talk about this on the podcast all the time. Kelly and I talk about this in the book, that usually the thyroid is like the dimmer switch. So when there's a stress response in the body's either going to be, typically the body's either in growth and development or it's in cell defense, right? It's not typically going to be in both of those at the same time. So thyroid hormone is used to kind of slow down normal metabolism and ramp up defense. So if I turn down the amount of T3 that's at a cell, that we slow down that normal metabolism, turn up cell defense. And when we talk about that, if it's a chronic stress response, instead of turning it off in lots of cells individually, the best thing to do is turn it off at the source, which is many times why we might see a hypothyroid condition develop just idiopathically, right? When you go back and look at the person's health history, their health timeline, you can see the problem developing over time as you look at their timeline. Chronic stress, trauma, gut infections, antibiotics, disrupted sleep patterns, hormones, medications, and then it's, their 40s and hey, I just got a thyroid condition. No, you've been developing that thyroid condition for years, just like you developed cardiovascular disease or anything else. And saying that hypothyroidism starts when you get diagnosed, thyroid gland's 90% damaged at that point, is like saying you developed cardiovascular disease when you had your heart attack. Really? Or has that been developing for a while? So we then say that, hey, what's driving the process is typically a cellular experience. And so there's some type of cell stress response or cell danger response that's impacting cells, that's impacting tissues or the body in general. And the body's trying to change or slow down the metabolism, ramp up that defense. So what creates that stress response? What creates that danger response? That's what everybody wants to know. Like, just tell me what it is and I'll fix it, right? Like, it's probably just one thing, and it's usually not one thing. And it's usually a combination of things, or what we call the load. And we talk about physical stress, we talk about chemical stress, we talk about toxins, we talk about radiation, we talk about disrupted sleep patterns, we talk about disrupted breathing patterns, we talk about gut infections or dysbiosis. You're talking about allergies and food sensitivities and food intolerances kind of led you down this path. And we often, as you said, blame the food, but it's really our body's response to that food, right? And so we also talk about emotional stress as being part of the issue, or trauma as being part of that issue. And those are sometimes things that people don't want to talk about or don't want to consider as a possibility. But I think it's a real issue that we have to consider, especially if I'm working on my breathing, I'm working on my gut, I've gotten rid of everything in my diet, I still have the problem. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do, nothing gets well. There's this piece that often needs to be addressed. And sometimes it's evident when somebody has a discussion with you, and sometimes you got to almost pull it out of them to say, hey, this may be, problems seem to start after this sexual abuse, this bad relationship, this abusive relationship, this car accident, this injury, something that created a trauma experience. It may be when the problems really start to occur. And it's not something that most of us in functional medicine are really trained on, right? But I think it's a key thing. And so that's probably for you, as you're doing your nutritional stuff, you're like, hey, how do I fix it? How do I address it? And maybe there's another component to it that's above what I'm looking at, right? I'm looking at what I think is the problem, but it may really be that this food sensitivity, this food intolerance is a symptom of a bigger problem that I got to dig deeper. And I think it's, there was a famous philosopher, I think his name is Donkey, right? And him and Shrek are walking through the field, and Donkey says to Shrek, people are like onions, right? You got to peel back the layers. And very often that's really what we need to do with our clients, is pull back the layers. And that's a layer that sometimes it's hard for people to jump to the conclusion that emotional experience or that traumatic experience could be at the root. It's not always the root issue. You could have past experience and past traumas, but it's one of those things that I really think especially the person who's gone from practitioner to practitioner and has done, I've done my gut thing so many times and it's not getting better, is you got to start to really look at that whole wheel of things that Kelly and I talked about in the book. So now we've got this kind of out in the open, and we talk about addressing emotional stress or past trauma. There's a number of different techniques out there, right? And maybe we need to have a better understanding of like what MAP method is. You kind of explained a little bit, but how does it differ? And what are some of those other techniques that people might think MAP method is or associate with? And then we'll talk about kind of, I'm sure there's some people, and me being one of those, as you sit back and you go, what is she talking about? This sounds a little bit woo-woo, where we're talking about, I'm going to talk to your subconscious, or I'm going to talk to your neural system. I'm going to retrain this on just with the conversation. So we'll have to get to that. But let's talk a little bit about what MAP method is and what are the other techniques that are similar and why does it differ?
Yeah. So I can start with that, but I think Dr. Kelly has a lot to offer here too, because she has tried a lot of techniques, and I think she has more of the experience of the difference. But I'll just start by saying that the MAP method was developed by psychotherapists and experimental psychologists, and its roots come from the energy psychology methods of the 1980s, like EMDR and tapping. So many of your listeners will be familiar with those methods. It has, I call it an advanced neural retraining method. And I feel that, though I did not experience those. I've never had an EMDR session. I did train in tapping, but it has evolved so much from those early energy psychology methods that it is almost unrecognizable, I would say now. But it is faster, gentler, and I feel like it's more effective because it is more complete. And the reason that is because we're working directly with the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind has access to all of your consciously held and unconsciously held memories. And so when we can, essentially we send the subconscious mind on a mission. So you may have a consciously held memory of a known stress. So many people have recognized, there were a number of stressful events that preceded my diagnosis, like in the year prior or something. So those are the consciously known factors, right? But when we can harness the power of the subconscious mind, which knows everything, is holding all of the memories, everything you've ever seen, tasted, experienced, witnessed, right? It will find all the connections to those. And so by neutralizing in a batch process, I believe it is a more complete neutralization of the issue. Dr. Kelly, did you want to talk about some of the way how you see the MAP method comparing with some of those other methods?
Sure. So I discovered the MAP method kind of on accident because, Eric and I, we've been writing this book, The Thyroid Debacle, and I thought I knew everything about everything, right? So there were some things I was still dealing with despite having all the knowledge to even write a book on this subject, right? And so I would say my number one complaint was I was still in this chronic fatigue. And I was like, I am doing every fitness factor correctly. I am optimized breathing, sleeping. I mean, everything was like spot on. And it takes a lot of effort to be completely spot on. And it's almost draining to a point. So I went and saw my friend who is a practitioner. She's able to test to see if one is still in a cell danger response. And she said, Kelly, you're still in a cell danger response. She's like, there's nothing else going on. I don't know what to tell you. So I was left to go figure out what's going on. Now, emotionally, we wrote a chapter on emotional fitness. I had done EMDR. I had done tapping. I was open to anything. I'm a skeptic by heart, but I'll tell you what, I am open. I will try different things. And I had tried them. And I will tell you this, I didn't have an adverse childhood event experience that I recognized, you guys. So for me, it was like, well, I don't need this. I don't need neural retraining, but I'll try it. I even tried Annie Hoppers because I was just tired of not being able to eat like everyone else, and was tired of walking in a perfume at Macy's and just being taken out. I was just tired of it. So I didn't identify with needing it. So then I had a practitioner friend call me, Kathy Moore, who is an amazing practitioner. And she said, Kelly, I think you need to go see Madeleine Lowry. I think you need to via Zoom. She's like, I really think this method, the Map Method, she's like, even though you don't identify with a trauma per se, or even though you really don't think that there's something emotionally that is dragging you down, she's like, it could be subconscious. It could be something you're not even recognizing. So okay, Kathy, okay, I'll call Madeleine. So I called Madeleine. I set up, I did not have a whole lot of confidence. I just, I'm like, okay, I actually just did it for Kathy. I will be honest with you. I was like, I would probably not be doing this because it is when you say working with your subconscious and it sounds really woo woo, right? But I will tell you this, after my first session, something completely changed for me. I will say that I don't have chronic fatigue anymore. And this was the only thing that I did that was different. And now I don't have to do the 100 other things I was doing. I don't have to work so hard on my diet. My brain is rewired. I know that for a fact, but I didn't really expect that to happen. And I don't think you can't guarantee that that's going to happen with other people. This is my personal experience. But I think it's important as practitioners and as people that we have a lot of tools in our toolkit, because living a life of eliminating down to 10 foods and trying to do everything, it is exhausting, right? And you have hypothyroidism, and then you're trying to do 25,000 things to be healthy. I mean, guys, I was right there with you, listeners. Like, I was right there with you. And so this is why I wanted to teach everyone and bring Madeleine on about this MAP method, because it's something that was just life-changing for me personally. I'm not making a guarantee, but I didn't even recognize I needed it. But again, it's something that I've just been so thankful for. So that's really my story with the MAP method.
So I think I think one of the things we want to do is kind of help the listeners out here. And we talk about this in the book, that to optimize your health, you have to raise your level of fitness in different areas of your health. So your physical fitness, your dietary fitness, your sleep fitness, your respiratory fitness, your habitual fitness, your metabolic fitness, and your emotional fitness, right? And so you're only going to get so healthy based on how high your fitness is in each one of those categories. If you only work on one or two, let's say I work on my physical fitness, right? And I exercise all the time, but I'm not paying attention to my sleep and my breathing and my emotional state, I may still have terrible health. And you could say, but they're eating well and they're exercising all the time, they're doing these healthy things. Why are they not healthy, or why am I not healthy when I'm doing two of those things that seem like I'm very healthy? Like, you look good, you exercise, you eat well, you should be healthy. Well, there's these other pieces or components that make up your overall health and well-being. And we have to raise the level of fitness of all of those things. And so I think what you're saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, hey, I was working on the physical fitness, the chemical fitness, the nutritional fitness, but my emotional fitness was the thing that was still holding me back and keeping me in kind of a cell stress or cell danger response. And I had to go and address that to get better. And I think the thing that's important is, and we talk about this, and I use that analogy probably on a couple different podcasts, like, for the listener, think about your stress level. Like, if you had two boards and a plank going across, right? And if we started stacking 5-pound weights on that plank, we can put a certain load on the plank. And at some point we add that last 5 pounds and put it on there. We're at 105 pounds and the board breaks, right? That's the danger response. That's now we're into a change in physiology where I'm in danger now. I've broken past what I can tolerate. And so when you ask people, and I kind of did this just at a seminar I spoke at in Atlanta, and said, which 5-pound weight was the problem? And somebody said the last one. And I said, okay, so I'm going to take that 5-pound weight off the broken, off the broken board, and the weight that's there, is it fixed? And she's like, well, obviously not. I was like, okay, so how much weight, how much of this stress load do I need to remove to repair the board? We're going to have to take all the weights off. Right? Mm-hmm. So if I have to take all the weights off to rebuild, right, to reinforce, and then I can start putting load on, is there any wonder why when you take somebody and just put them on a gluten-free diet, they don't get better? That's like taking a 5-pound weight off something that's already broken. The board's still there. And so for you, you were pulling those 5-pound weights off and trying to rebuild a system. Like I've got to, if I take this and I work on this, it'll rebuild my health. And it was part of a process, but the board was still broken. You had to take that last like 5-pound weight off, that emotional trauma piece, to be able to fully allow that system to be rehabbed and refurnished. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think like maybe using emotional trauma may be a little bit too heavy of the jargon, because I would even say just too much stress on my limbic system. Just my limbic system was not functioning optimally. So kind of bring it back into a neurology type instead of over in kind of the, mental health. Like I didn't have any mental health diagnoses. I slept fine. I didn't have anxiety and things like that. So you don't have to be in trauma or, have some trauma again, but it might obviously it was the piece where it was like, pull it off. And then things just started to really rapidly change.
But I think if we think about that from an emotional standpoint, just if we use the same analogy, instead of now all the things, physical, chemical, emotional, if we just think of that plank about emotional stress could be just in that category. We could say, if I let's say I have a massive trauma, that's like dropping the 100-pound weight on the board. It drops like that. Sure. But that's not necessarily what causes problems for everybody. Sometimes it is the 5-pound weights just in that emotional category where, okay, I had a bad relationship with my parents. I left home when I was young. I had to work on my own, and you just keep loading. I had college and I had bills, and I got, my kids, and I got to deal with their challenges. And it's still stress that builds on that plank. And if you don't have the opportunity to kind of take some of that weight off temporarily and kind of clear the slate, then those 5-pound weights of emotional stress can still break the board and cause the experience that keeps us in a danger response, right? Sure. So Madeleine, this is maybe different. Maybe you haven't heard my board analogy, but how do you see how emotional stress or past trauma, or just how we've kind of compartmentalized these things, can be a factor that creates an excessive stress response, maybe a danger response, or inhibits us from actually recovering?
Yeah, I love that analogy, actually. And I would say that maybe we could even add to it by saying that for the person who has had early or maybe just severe lifetime trauma experiences, painful emotional experiences, that board gets thinner. Not for everyone, but I'm just saying for the person who has that history, they are more predisposed to having that board get thinner, right? So they're already in some kind of they're
sub-threshold.
They're primed, yeah.
Yeah, has taught their limbic system of the brain. So Dr. Kelly was talking about the limbic system, which is the part of the brain that processes all sensory information, and it decides at any moment, are we safe or are we not safe, right? So because of those previous experiences, that limbic system is already primed for, oh, the world is a dangerous place. I have to be on guard all the time, right? Looking for danger everywhere. So that board is like thinner than it may be for other people. And then I would say in other cases, you have a very sensitive person. And so it doesn't even take much of what we would normally recognize as trauma to, they started out life with a thin board, you know? And so, and sometimes those two cases are combined, you know? So it's very individual is what I would say.
So I think for the person who is struggling with chronic health issues, and if you haven't really dealt with this emotional piece really well, that may be one of those key things to consider, like, is this the piece? Instead of looking for the other shiny objects and sexy things out there, like maybe I have metal toxicity, maybe it's hidden, maybe it's Lyme, maybe it's mold, especially if you've been down those routes and you're not finding the thing, maybe the thing is maybe that emotional fitness category is not as high as you think it might be. And I think Kelly's point is really good. Sometimes we don't necessarily realize the impact of previous experiences are having, because we've compartmentalized and said, hey, I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to put it over there and it's not going to be an issue. And it goes into maybe our subconscious versus our conscious. That happens all the time. I mean, I've had experiences with patients when you're like, why are you not doing what is going to get you better? Why are you not doing the things that we're talking about it, you should do it, and you still won't do it? And I've had patients kind of blurt out unexpectedly. I don't think they even knew what they were saying. Matter of fact, I can think of one person that blurted it out and was like, and the person that was with them on the consult was like, what did you just say? Like, everybody knew the person was struggling, but they couldn't find the thing. And, we're doing tests to find the thing. And the person just came out with a response like, because if I do it, I'm going to die. And I think she caught herself off guard. I think she caught the person that was with her off guard, and she caught me off guard. And I was like, what? But it went back to a traumatic experience. Something happened in the process of her medical care that was given to her. And when she was given something, then that created a reaction that she almost lost her life. And so now, in an effort to try and, this is years later, decade or so later, we're trying to help her. But all the things we're trying to do to change diet, to give her nutrition, to support stomach acid, all those things to help, she wouldn't do it. And when it blurted out like that, like, because it's going to kill me, she had an association with medical treatment or treatment that it almost killed her once. So this is going to do it too. Is that similar to what we're talking about here?
Yes, that's a perfect example of a subconsciously held belief. And so with the MAP method, we can also ferret these out. This person had access to that in that moment and could tell you, right? She made that connection and could verbalize it, but not most people, I would say, probably don't. There's resistance, but they don't know the source. With the MAP method, we can find those unconsciously held beliefs and change them, because it's like a program, right? It's a program that's running in your operating system that's not serving you. You don't even realize that this program is there. But we can change subconscious programming with this method. So, that's another way in which we can address chronic illness. And everything you just described there about like the kinds of experiences that people with long-term chronic illness have been through, there are many, even just those experiences with medical systems and practitioners and lab test results that turn out badly, or diagnoses that are delivered, shocking news, procedures that are scary, all of those things. Those are all like they're all traumas. It's like a string of traumas. And so sometimes where we have to start with someone who has had a lot of those is we have to begin just with neutralizing each of those experiences so that they can feel more neutral, like the fear, the anxiety, and all the resistance can be laid to rest, and they can feel more empowered and more accepting, and create like that a space for healing, right? Whereas they were kind of rejecting it before on some subconscious level, they can now, physiologically be more open to it.
So somebody might say, well, wouldn't that woman have known, right, that car accident and that was the reason why? Wouldn't somebody know that a past experience was causing their problem? And I think, obviously Kelly had something that was creating a block. I'm sure this is a person who never brought it up. We talked about things, what was going on, that was never brought up as that might be a potential thing. Nope, that wasn't a big deal, blah, 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 blah. But then it came out later. So why do you think some people don't realize that there's something emotionally or traumatic that's holding them back? Is that part of the protective response?
Yeah, I just think that's the nature of the mind, right? We have this conscious mind, the thinking mind, the logical mind, right? The cerebral cortex. And then we have the subconscious mind. And remember that 90 to 95% of all brain activity is unconscious. It is not available to our conscious mind. And in fact, it is the subconscious mind that runs all the systems of the body. Always has. When you were in perfect health, it's not because you got up in the morning and said, let's set that thermostat to 98.6. Let's order those hormone levels, right? Let's make sure we got enough precursors so we can make those neurotransmitters. Like, you never had to think about that. Your subconscious mind has been managing all of this, monitoring, calibrating, and coordinating all of these systems for your optimal health. However, when health starts to decline, we never say, gee, I wonder what's going on in the subconscious mind. It used to be able to manage this all very well, but now it's not. What's going on? What is stuck, right? What is there that is stuck? So, you ask the question, like, how, what's the difference between the people that maybe know and people that don't know? I do think that some people who listen to this podcast will fall into the camp of realizing, oh yeah, I definitely always suspected that, there was a stressful period followed by this, followed by this, followed by my diagnosis, right? They kind of have had a sense of that there was something about stress that led to the diagnosis. Sometimes it's a big event. My brother died, and I know my Parkinson's was diagnosed after that, right? Other people, it's maybe more diffuse. There isn't that easy connection that can be made, but the subconscious mind knows its own programming. So we can still get there by working directly with the subconscious mind. And I think Dr. Kelly would say that that's true of your first MAP session, right? There was no defined trauma experience that you knew of, that you came to with, here's this trauma, I think it's causing me a problem. It wasn't like that. It was, it was more of a neutralization of issues that probably didn't even come into your conscious awareness as they were being neutralized. So right. The other thing I want to make sure people understand is that you do not have to relive traumas. This is not a method that requires that you consciously process all this stuff. No, the subconscious mind will go in and neutralize all the associated memories and experiences. And when I say neutral, I don't mean that we erase the memories. I just mean that the painful emotions around the memory will be reduced in intensity.
Yeah, and so to give a real life how it went for me is that I started EMDR probably about 6 months before I saw Madeleine. And
EMDR, can you explain
sure,
EMDR?
Sure. Yeah, eye movement desensitization. That's EMDR? I don't know what the R stands for. But basically, you're during the session, you're with a practitioner, and you're encouraged to literally bring to your mind every traumatic event that you can think of, and it is it is embarrassing. It is painful. I mean, like, I thought to myself, well, if this is going to help, I guess I'll just go through the Rolodex. Okay, when I was 5 years old, no one wanted to sit with me at lunchtime. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, okay, we're going to do, but it's like, it was, I mean, good for people who like it and who've gotten really good results. And I'm really happy. So this is just my personal experience, but it was awkward. And I didn't like having to like dig for traumas, and I was crying, and I would walk out of there and I wouldn't feel any better. So when I first was with Madeleine, I asked her, I was like, well, are we going to have to do that? And she said, no. So what I think of as the MAP method is when I was in a session, I will bring to mind something that I have an emotional reaction toward, right? But I don't have to go into a dissertation, and I don't have to talk about it. I don't have to open up my whole life story to Madeleine. It's just my subconscious goes, oh, I identify that feeling. I understand that feeling of frustration. And then it's just like, it's almost like it grabs onto the rope, goes all the way up into my subconscious, goes into other patterns. And pretty soon it's like, it's almost the analogy where it's like, if you get cut off in traffic where it's like really dangerous and someone cuts you off and you have that reaction, you're like, whoa. And then you're driving, maybe a couple minutes later, you're still upset. It's like, imagine all of a sudden, like, it's gone. You can still see the event, it happened, but it has no emotional light up for you whatsoever. That's what it does. That's what the MAP method does for some of the things that actually did really incite emotional things for me. It's like they happened, but there's neutrality to it, right? I'm not being brainwashed, but now that doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve people to keep anger. It doesn't serve them to keep traumas and things. That's not your body and brain. The body holds everything, right? That holds all these traumas and all these things. And the body's trying to tell you something when you're not well. The body's trying to communicate to you when you're not well. So kind of going off on a tangent here, but
no, I think that's fine. But I think one of those things that's important that because there's a couple things, important things that you said, and we kind of ferret those out a little bit. One of those is in types of therapy where what I hear right away is like, one of the therapies is I have to unlock all the bad things that happened to me in my life. Well, part one may be like, if I've compartmentalized those and I push those deep into the subconscious, you may ask me, what are the traumatic experiences you've had in your life? And you say, I can't think of it. I can't remember any. And, Madeleine and I had a similar conversation about this. And I would say that I've had some challenges in my past, and maybe for me, I've locked those back. But if you ask me, what are those things that I feel still impacted by, I would tell you I've moved past them. And maybe I have, right? Because I feel like I'm in a really good place.
Right.
Or maybe some of those experiences are things that I have pushed so far back that I don't realize how they're impacting my physiology. And so if you say to me, hey, tell me, if you go to some type of therapy where they say, tell me all your past traumas, past experiences. Well, A, I don't remember them. And B, I don't want to bring them back up, right? So right there can be a stop to the therapy, because it may take, somebody's going to have to work really hard to excavate the brain, especially a dude's brain, to try and get to some of those experiences. And is it good? I don't know. Is it good if that past trauma, that past experience that I've compartmentalized, I put in the box in the back of the attic and I put it away, and it's not necessarily impacting me now? Do I need to rip that scar back open, re-experience that, and potentially have another trauma laid on me? Because now I go, oh my gosh, now I realize, and now I'm even more traumatized by it. I thought I'd put it aside. So I think that may be an issue, but now the MAP method you're saying is a little bit different, because now instead of needing to go back and know what the thing was or the experience was, and Madeleine, you could correct me if I'm wrong, what you're trying to do with the MAP method is just say, what is the thing that is bugging you now? What is your feeling around that and about it? And just change the emotional conversation in the limbic system about what that represents. Like for the person, if you were in a car accident, and now every time somebody cuts out in front of you, you're like, go, you son of a, and cursing, and you're flipped out and you're emotional for an extended period of time, versus the other conversation in the brain could be, well, hey, thank goodness we didn't get in a car accident. That could have been severe. Let's just keep going. Am I on the right track with that, Madeleine?
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Yeah. I do think, we don't need to know what the traumas are. And what I love, I just want to go back to EMDR and tapping. These are excellent, effective techniques, right? So I want people to understand that. Mm-hmm. Psychotherapy, excellent technique. So I have nothing bad to say about these things. I just want people to understand the contrast between these techniques. So if you're looking for something that's a little gentler, that the MAP method could be that for you, because we don't have to know what the trauma is, exactly what you're saying. We only need to know how it's limiting us in our life today. I have this symptom, or I have no energy, or I have a lot of anxiety, or I'm depressed. I have panic attacks. I have compulsions, right? We just have to know how they're affecting us today, emotionally, physically, mentally. That is enough to train the subconscious mind on what the connections are, and to go looking for them and start to neutralize them. In the example of a car accident, I work with a lot of people that have phobias about driving on the freeway because of these kinds of experiences, right? Near-death experiences that the body remembers, right? Just like Dr. Kelly said, the body remembers everything, even when we don't consciously remember it. And so that, the experience of getting on the highway all of a sudden is putting them in like level 10 anxiety, right? We can neutralize the emotional pain, the emotional intensity around those experiences, even if you don't remember all of them. And then the person can engage with this activity again with a much lower level of anxiety. Sometimes it goes to 0, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe it goes down to a 2, but either way, it allows you to function in a better way, right? Yeah.
So when you say neutralize, somebody sitting listening to this is going, what do you mean you're neutralizing? What does that mean? Can you explain for the listeners what that means?
Yeah. So I'd love to have Dr. Kelly talk about what it's like to be in a MAP session, because I think that would be really illustrative for your listeners.
Sure. So during a session, it's a Zoom session. I've actually never met Madeleine in person, which is kind of funny. We've become really, really pretty good friends. So you're in a Zoom session. Madeleine will give you the opening commands, so that you have to, before the session, you have to be, is it attuned to the map? So you just have to watch a video, right? Or
yeah.
What would the word be?
Everyone's initiated to the method by watching a video, and then we do a couple of preparatory steps at the beginning of the first session.
Sure. So very simple. And again, this is not like being hypnotized. I was just literally watching a YouTube video on like how this works. So she gives the session commands, and then sometimes it depending on the session, and Madeleine is really good about kind of honing in on what a person needs. So this isn't cookie cutter, right? We'll talk about maybe an event that has some emotional charge to it. And we'll think about that emotion, and she'll have me rate this emotion. And so I'll rate it at like an 8. And then we'll go through, and she'll give some commands to my subconscious, to call it the superconscious. And I'm just quietly sitting there in a chair with my eyes closed. And she'll give some commands. And sometimes I'll actually physically feel something in my brain, or sometimes I don't feel anything. Sometimes I'll see colors. Sometimes it's just all very different, and I'm really just open to whatever. The session takes us, most are 90 minutes, some are 60 minutes. But then we'll go back, and I'll rate that. I'll go back to that experience, and I'll rate how I feel about it, and it's just blows my mind how there's just no emotion. And it's like, oh, I mean, because it takes a toll on my entire system when my emotional response to things is so off. So that, I mean, is there anything else like during the session that you'd want to mention for that?
Yeah, so no, I think that's a great explanation. I mean, so in terms of Dr. Eric's question, what do we mean when we say neutralizing? So, and on my website, there's a video about this that people can watch, but essentially what science has found in the year 2000, this was a discovery made by a neuroscientist at McGill University in Canada. He found that there's a window of reconsolidation, right? So we used to think, for 100 years, we used to believe that long-term memories could not be changed. But then, as I said, at McGill University, they found that there's this window of reconsolidation where you can bring up a memory, you can separate the emotional content from the actual memory, the actual memory, and then replace the negative emotions with neutral to positive emotions, whatever's appropriate, and resave the memory. So you can think about this method as being like a high-speed way of doing this. Remember, the subconscious mind is very powerful. I've heard it said that we have the processing power of 200 million supercomputers. That sounds pretty high to me, but anyway, even if it's only 2 million supercomputers, it's a lot of processing. And so what we're doing with the instructions is the practitioner is offering instructions to your subconscious mind, what we call the superconscious. We gave it a promotion because it has access to everything in your conscious mind and your unconscious mind. So it's really not sub anything. We give it instructions, and your mind, your subconscious, decides to what extent it is willing to accept the instruction or carry it out, right? So this is really all under your control. So it's almost like, so I'm providing instruction, you're hearing it, your conscious mind is hearing it, but more importantly, your subconscious mind is hearing it. And with these preparatory steps that we talked about, the initiation to the MAP method, your subconscious mind has become primed to these instructions and will start to focus on this memory that you're holding in your mind, the thoughts you had around it, the emotions you have around it, because that's what you're doing. You're sitting there almost in a meditative state, eyes closed, relaxed, breathing slowly, deeply, gently, and subconscious mind going, oh, okay, I see the emotional signature of that memory. It's like, that's the template, right? And now we're going to go and find all the associations to that and start to take each memory, like separate the emotions, resave with neutral to positive emotions, next, right? So it may do this hundreds of times in 3 or 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And I can physically feel that. I mean, I can physically feel that reprocessing, and it's different for everyone. So that's important. And I will just say this is that my number one complaint was chronic fatigue. I still don't know what exact memory, trauma, emotion. I don't know what was tagged to it, but I don't care because it's gone, and I processed through it. And I've had times where I've seen Madeleine for about a year now, where I've started to dip down into fatigue, and I do a MAP session, and something in there just rewires, neutralizes, and I'm back.
So, for the listener, you may be thinking, okay, wait a sec. The woman's talking to this other person, the client, over Zoom, and just kind of talking to her subconscious, superconscious, and somehow the person's changing. I don't know if I buy it, right? That could be in the background. So the issue for me is like, I'm that person, right? I'm the skeptic. I'm the hard shell. The science kind of, I need it. Let's see the study, right? But in some aspect, we're always doing this and training the subconscious. So if you're a person who writes affirmations, what are you trying to do? You're trying to feed the subconscious, right? You're putting positive thoughts and feelings into your brain. I'm going to be successful today. I'm going to do this. You are trying to prime that subconscious or superconscious so that you can have a positive outlook, right? We also do it the other way. I look terrible in these clothes. I am fat. I am this. I'm never going to find the person I love, right? None of these things. Every day, day in, day out, you have thoughts. The words, the things you say to yourself are programming your brain one way or the other. The problem is in today's society is that we're so inundated many times with a negative conversation coming into our brain. The world's ending. Everybody's terrified that they're going to die of COVID, right? We've got everything that's going on is this negative experience because it's sexy, it sells. And we are always in a state where we're training that subconscious brain. So we have to be very careful. We do this from early on in life, right? You're a bad kid. You're never going to be anything successful in life. You're a waste, you're whatever. That programs your physiology and changes your experiences. And sometimes we think about, why do I snap at people when they yell at me? Well, maybe that is because of the experiences that you had as a child. When you were a child, you got yelled at and screamed at all the time. And as soon as that occurs, you get defensive and you get anxious and you get irritated. And even though that other person is not yelling at you, they're just talking loud, it may still be perceived like you're attacking me, when in reality it is not. Am I close there, Madeleine?
Yeah. Everything you said is spot on. It's exactly right that in everyday life, we are programming. There's programming happening at all times. And I think as practitioners too, we have to be aware of this, because practitioners can sometimes deliver their opinions about prognoses in maybe less than sensitive ways. And this is programming, right? So if you tell someone you have 6 months to live,
you'll live up to it, possibly.
Each person is different, but some people will that will become their truth. Other people, that will be the thing that makes them say, oh no, I'm going to show you.
Right.
I'm going to show you that you're wrong, right? So each person reacts in their own way. The same event can have a different response for each person, but these are all inputs. These are all inputs into the huge supercomputer that we are. And yeah, go ahead.
And we talk about why the diagnosis sometimes is not a great thing. When we diagnose somebody, well, you have this, that can become somebody's identity, and to get them well is sometimes near impossible, because that's who I am, right? I'm a limey, I'm a moldy, I'm a fibro, right? And so that is the identity that in their subconscious. So sometimes it may be the ability to get them better we're never going to get them better, because they would have to change who they perceive they are. And so we have to change that aspect of, no, you're like, and I think maybe that's where something like the MAP method will come in. So what does that mean to you to say that you're aligned? What does that experience mean to you? What does that mean you can be or should be or can't be because of that diagnosis? Is that possible?
I just want to make a note. I think that's why this works really well with weight loss too, right? I've seen a lot of really good comments about the weight, because it's just this subconscious, like, I don't deserve to be happy. I don't deserve. And then it's like, fix that, right? And, don't diet, calorie restrict, like fix the subconscious. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. Yes. And also to what you're saying, Dr. Eric, I think, you're exactly right. For the people who have been sick for a long time, years, and they've joined all these support groups, and they've become just very identified with their diagnoses. Part of turning that around, if they're open to such an approach, is, like I said, to start working through the traumas, the medical traumas that they've had, or the practitioner traumas, or just the experience of having all of these, treatments and therapies and things, and then letting go, creating some space between them and this diagnosis identity, right? We call this resistance. So a lot of, what we're working through with the MAP method is resistance to letting it go. If there is some benefit, if there is some perception that we belong to a community, and that part of the rapport we have with this community, part of the support we have, comes from this diagnosis. That's something that we can start to unwind, so that the person can feel a little bit more neutral. Again, create this space for healing, a little more openness. And, I try to encourage people, focus on how the symptoms are limiting your life instead of holding on to this diagnosis, right? Which is sort of like this meta idea.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let's talk about, and I want to make sure as people listen to the podcast that we're not talking like this, because I'm gonna ask you like what kind of conditions that you've helped, and we know that there's been lots of different conditions that you help, and somebody may sit back and go, like, how is this helping everything? But before we get into that, I want to kind of make sure the listener understands, like, for me, for Kelly, for you, we're not necessarily trying to treat a diagnosed name or condition. When somebody comes to us in the functional space, what we should be trying to do is identify what those stressors are: physical, chemical, emotional, traumatic, habitual, sleep issue, whatever those stressors are, reduce the stressors. And when you reduce the stress load and you reduce that danger response, anything and everything has the potential to get better. So that's where everything that you do to raise your level of fitness across the board in all these categories has the potential to help anything, which is different sometimes than the allopathic thought process, like X condition needs X treatment. In a functional perspective, it should be, we address the stress, reduce the load, restore function, and potentially anything can get better. So there is no limitation if you restore normal function and physiology. Is that fair to say when you see people in the MAP method that you've been able to help people with lots of different diagnosed conditions improve because you're reducing the emotional or traumatic stress load for them?
Yes, I would definitely say that the MAP method is a wellness practice, right? So we do not diagnose or treat disease. It does work on a couple of different levels. We talked about how it reduces subconscious sources of stress, so stresses that you may not be aware of. It also helps to reduce consciously known sources of stress. It can help to change subconscious programming. It can neutralize those memories of past pain and health traumas, right, that are there. And as we talked about, identify and neutralize these subconsciously held sources of resistance, right? Including identification with diagnoses, et cetera. And as Dr. Kelly has suggested, it may help to turn off the cell danger response, because I see that as part of the stress response, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the stress load is really high, that is just a foundational, it's just a precursor or whatever for the cell danger response to be turned on, right? At some point that switch gets flipped. I also want to say that the MAP method is not a miracle, right? So Dr. Kelly she had an amazing response to her first session. This is not the norm. I will say that for emotional patterns, 1 to 3 sessions, approximately. For something that's more on a mental level, compulsions, let's say, maybe more like 4 to 6 sessions. Physical symptoms also are sort of deeper and more entrenched. And, I say at least 4 to 6 sessions, and can be, of course, more than that, but it's not like a forever thing, right? It's not like other modalities where you're going to see your practitioner every week for 6 months or a year. This is more like maybe every other week for a handful of times. And at that point you will know, yeah, this is something that's really effective for me, or, no, it's not. I'm going to work with my brain in another way. And that's another point. There's a lot of ways to work with your brain. This is one option. Mm-hmm. If this doesn't appeal to you, just don't forget that the brain is really powerful. We shouldn't forget about the power of the brain, and find a modality that appeals to you, that you feel like you could embrace. And yeah, I think it's an important part for healing. Yeah,
right. On that is that absolutely the MAP method is not a miracle, because I spent years optimizing my other physical fitness factors. And if I wouldn't have done that, if I would have just walked in to Madeleine's office, I don't even know if it would have helped me at all. So that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm like, walk in and all your problems will be gone. I mean, that I was just a good candidate. And I will say this, is that I had a good response to my first session, but then I'd dip down, and then I have to do another. And then I dip, I mean, it wasn't like, and I'm cured. And I was tired. So let's not use a medical diagnosis of chronic fatigue. I was just tired, right? And now I'm not so tired anymore. So again, this is not a replacement for medical care. It's not a replacement for antidepressant medications. We are totally for anything and everything you need to do to be healthy, right? So caveat that.
Well, I think it's like anything else, right? You could say it's probably one of those things like exercise, right? If you're doing it consistently, you're going to see benefit. With something like the MAP method, you may be great emotionally for a while, and then you may have that emotional load start to build up and your board starts to sag. And now, hey, I got to change my internal conversation about my emotional load so that I can almost like kind of revitalize, clear some of the weight off, change my experience around this load that keeps building. And now I can kind of get a fresh start again. So I think that's kind of what you're saying when you're like, hey, it really helped. And the other thing is, we're not always ready sometimes to receive a certain type of treatment. There's times when you're not physically ready to increase your exercise level. You're not chemically ready to increase your exercise load. So we have to that's why I think from a functional medicine perspective, we have to look at the 30,000 foot view with somebody and say, okay, where's the best place that I can look at this kind of what we call that physiologic web of dysfunction, all the stuff that's going on, because it's all interconnected. Where can I kind of pull on that web of dysfunction and have the biggest impact versus pulling on the edge of the web and having an impact, but not necessarily a significant impact. And that may mean you have to kind of work on something, keep that status quo, go to the next thing, and kind of keep building it up to raise that level of fitness in each of those categories, not just focusing on one thing. Because we see, especially as an athlete, we see when you focus on just, I'm going to exercise and that's going to be my thing. Some athletes are some of the most unhealthy people we see, me included. Like, how did I drive myself to have Hashimoto's and Raynaud's and insulin resistance? Because I was exercising way too hard, plus work, plus limited sleep, plus poor breathing, no emotional stress, and definitely, all that stuff starts to wear on the surface. It looks like it's all good, but when you dig in, you start to take 30,000 foot view. You go, why are you only sleeping 4 hours? Well, because that's for the week. Okay, we got to change that. We got to change some other things. And I will say, and I want to ask Madeleine, and because Kelly brought it up, I think it's a good thing that not everybody is going to be the person who's going to have like an immediate first time experience. And I would guess, especially with our conversation that we had, that there's people that are going to be very easy to kind of get at their emotional experience or how they respond to stuff. It's very easy for them to express where they're at, not necessarily know what it is, but say, I feel angry or upset or something about that. And then there's going to be others, like me, who maybe have a harder crust that it might take more experiences or more trauma for that person maybe to potentially let down their guard or that shield that they've built where hey, I don't share that stuff, or I'm good. I'm not, and I think that's part of the issue too. So you have to, as the person going into it, I'm sure you see people like me who are like, I'm good. And you see people who are, I have a problem. Here it is. I'm ready to lay it out. Puke this whole thing right out here for you. And you're like, okay, this is really easy. And then you got the hard crusted shelled over person. You go, this is going to take me a couple sessions to break through this. Is that the case sometimes?
Well, yeah. Well, actually, that's probably not the spectrum that I see. I see more whether there's kind of more multi-causal factors versus maybe like one thing, right? So like when Dr. Kelly came to see me, as she said, she'd been working on this for years, right? So there was like, you can think of each problem as like, how many roots does it have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when she came, and a lot of practitioners are like this, when they come to see me, it's like I'm helping them sever the last like 1 or 2 roots that are left, right? Because they've taken care of 98 already. And so that they see progress more quickly, let's say. For other people who aren't that far along in their health journey, it may take repeated sessions before we start to see changes on a physical level. So it does vary very much on the person. And like Dr. Kelly said, this is not cookie cutter. This is extremely individualized to exactly the subject that you want to work on and exactly what is going on in your mindscape. And even as, in the descriptions or the examples that you provided, the person can say and is aware of what the traumatic event was, and the person who can't, they're only telling me what they know at their conscious mind. What's going on with the subconscious mind? None of us really has access to that. So
right, but from the conscious mind, right? You may have people that know, okay, this is it, and then you may have people that are coming to you. I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of people that go, okay, I know this, what I'm coming for. I know what I'm coming for. That's maybe the major person. Most people who say, I'm going to call Dr. Walcavage just because I think I have some type of a thyroid problem. That's why I'm going there. So people are coming to you oftentimes knowing, but I'm sure there's people maybe like me, like Kelly, who get there maybe Kelly did or didn't know consciously what was going on. She knew what her symptom was, but there may be people there that as they come in, they're not able to communicate necessarily what that thing they're concerned about. They just know they're not well, but they don't know how to communicate that message. Does it sometimes take you a conversation or a session or two to really get at what is that thing that you need to change the conversation around?
Yeah, yes, it does. And I can give you two quick examples, right? Mm-hmm. So I mentioned earlier, the woman who came to me who said, she has Parkinson's, later stage Parkinson's. And I said, well, so what was going on prior to your diagnosis? Oh, my brother died, And so there was this known big trauma. Also, she was very open to the method. She had tried other methods of working with her mind. So again, quicker results. Then, and then, I think of another client that I have, a guy who came and said, I have this high blood pressure. I've had high blood pressure for 15 or 16 years. Oh, okay. And what was going on in the months or year leading up to that? I said, well, often high blood pressure is related to like repressed anger or frustration, resentment. I said, does that ring a bell? Do you resonate with that? No. He was one of those people who like, everything's fine, right? Everything is very fine. He's very affable. And I said, well, tell me what was going on in your life, in the last, months to years, to year leading up to this diagnosis. And we had to dig a little bit. But then he starts describing these work situations that were very, let's call them demeaning. And I thought, oh, here we have something, right? But as he's describing, no, do I feel anger? No, I don't feel anger about this. This happened. I got demoted. Other people were promoted above me. I was still training them, right? But I don't have any anger about that. But we work with the subconscious mind, and we neutralize the emotions around the set of experiences, which unfolded over a number of actually years, 2 or 3 years prior to the diagnosis. And then at his next session, he's telling me, I haven't had to take my blood pressure medications for the last month. And I take my blood pressure every morning, and it has been fine. So whether or not you know or can tell me what it is, we have hunches.
That's part of the technique.
Yes, we go looking for what the likely patterns are. And sometimes we hit it on the first time, and sometimes we don't, and it takes 3, 4, 5 times, again, it's very individual, very individual. It's all about exactly what's going on in your mind.
So we cruise through an hour. Okay. So, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So Madeleine, can you if somebody's like resonating with what we've talked about and saying, hey, I need some help in that kind of section. There's something there that's blocking for me. I'd like to find out more about it. How do they find out about you? Where do they go? Who do they talk to? How do they potentially schedule? Or how would you direct them to potentially look at this as a technique to help them?
Yeah, so for anyone who is interested in learning more, I have a very informative webpage with a number of videos that you can watch that explains about the technique, the science behind it, the applications, and the research. And that can be found at mindremapforhealth.com. I also have a Facebook group by the same name. And we can talk about this for hours because it is so unknown, like people haven't heard of it. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done around it. And so to that end, I have podcasts. So if you go to my website, you will find a podcast tab. And the last 10 podcast sessions or so are all about the MAP method and its various applications. I talk to different practitioners to find out how they're using it. Different people talk about their own experiences with it and what they have seen for themselves and for their patients. So I think all of those resources could be helpful. Also, I do offer a free 15-minute consultation. So if you are on the fence and you want to talk to me about it, you can schedule a few minutes with me to talk by phone.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I think we just kind of dipped our toes a little bit in the water of what we're talking about. So maybe down the line, we get you back and have another conversation and maybe dig a little bit deeper. But I appreciate you coming on. Your website and your contact information, I'll put in the notes of the podcast, but I appreciate you coming on. Kelly, thanks for introducing us and telling me, hey, we got to get her on the podcast, putting some of this information in the book. For the listeners, just keep an open mind. I mean, this is another piece of the puzzle that's often not looked at or experienced. This is like you put that puzzle together and you're like, I'm missing like two pieces here. Like you're looking all over for it. This may be the piece of the puzzle that you haven't tackled yet or haven't tackled appropriately yet. And this may be like, okay, this is the piece I need to either get the whole process kick-started to start getting healthy, or maybe potentially be something along the journey that gets you up to the next level, or actually finally gets you to that last step where you're out of that fight, flight, or freeze state that we associate with excessive stress and get you into a recovery phase. So thanks you guys so much for coming on. For the listeners, make sure you share this podcast with friends and family, and we'll be back again in a couple of weeks for another episode. All right.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Eric.